Words Their Way, Chapter 7, Syllables and Affixes stage. Key characteristics of students this age, so they're intermediate readers. So this means second to middle grades. During this stage, students begin systematically studying how different syllables are joined. There's a really strong focus on orthographic development during this stage. Focusing on literacy development first. In regards to reading, students during this stage focus on content and disciplinary text. So during this stage, students start reading a lot from textbooks and trying to gain knowledge on specific topics. Background knowledge and vocabulary become very important during this stage to understand these academic texts. This is also known as the consolidated alphabetic stage. This is when students begin looking at words with 2 or more units of sound. And there's a strong focus on morphemes. Students also begin reading with greater fluency than in the transitional stage. By the end of this stage, most students can read 140 words per minute in narrative text, and they can read even faster when reading silently. For writing, students are much more confident and fluent in their writing during this stage. They're able to work on pieces over multiple days, and students can begin revising their own work for spelling and punctuation accuracy. Additionally, students during this stage begin to develop a voice when writing. For vocab, reading is the primary source of new vocabulary for students during this stage. Despite that, students still need active instruction on vocab to ensure they're successful with retaining it. Looking at orthographic development. So for one of the first things for orthographic development is they begin learning base words and inflectional endings. So inflectional endings are endings that change the tense and the number of a word, do not change its meaning or the part of speech. So this could be endings like s, ed, er, or ing. Most students have encountered these types of words since they began reading, but this is when they first begin to start studying them systematically. The S ending is the most common ending that students will see. During this stage, students learn when they have to add an ES versus an S, when they need to change a Y to an I, and when other spelling or punctuation changes happen when words become plural. An example would be wife to wives. For the ED and ING ending, students need to learn when to double letters to the base word. One way of thinking about this is if there's one syllable, one vowel, and then one consonant, you need to double the letter at the end. This is something students begin learning during this stage. Students also begin learning compound words during this stage. Students learn that many of the high frequency and high utility words they've been using can be combined to form new words. This also starts to bring explicit attention to syllables in words. When students learn that there's 2 words inside of one bigger word, they need to focus on the syllables. Students also learn about open and closed syllables and syllable junctures. During this stage, students learn that open syllables end with a long vowel sound, whereas closed syllables usually contain a short vowel sound, usually surrounded by 2 consonants. Students learn to double the consonant or to keep the vowel short. Students also will learn about syllable juncture or syllable types. Usually they receive one or the other or a combination of these 2 types of instruction. Syllable juncture patterns are things that have like closed syllables is a VCCV pattern, whereas open syllables are V-CV. These are the 2 most common. So this is very similar to when learning CVC words, but learning about it in relationship to syllable junctures. The other type of instruction is where students just learn about syllable types rather than the junctures. The syllable types include open, closed, a vowel consonant, vowel team, R-controlled, and final stable syllables. Students also in this stage learn about accented and unaccented syllables. Students learn how stress and accents can modify a syllable sound. Generally, syllables are harder to pronounce when they're unaccented. This often means that it's harder for students to decode syllables that are unaccented than accented syllables. Accents are also really important when determining the meaning of homographs, and students begin learning about those in this stage. Students also continue to receive explicit instruction on consonants and learn new ways that consonants can be pronounced in multiple syllable words. They also continue to look at the impact of silent consonants in words. Finally, students also begin learning about base words and simple derivational affixes. So they begin studying derivational affixes, and this means that the affixes affect the meaning and grammatical functions of words. These are things like FUL or LY or NESS. They also begin learning about the meaning of base words and how these base words change when different affixes are added. Some broad ways that word instruction can be conducted during this stage is teaching students how to use context clues. A lot of instruction goes on related to morphemic analysis. Students start to learn a lot about how to use dictionaries. They can use graphic organizers. Word sorts are still very common, along with vocabulary sorts. Domain-specific vocab instruction is really important to make sure that students understand the content they are learning. And related, they can do concept sorts as well. The first activity for this is going to be Vocabulary Jeopardy! So the purpose of this activity is to help students study vocabulary that is related to specific topics. You will need index cards, markers, and a game board or a whiteboard for this. So broadly, the procedure is to hand out index cards to students and ask them to write down a vocab word related to a specific topic, sort the index cards into categories, and students get to play Jeopardy! By guessing the words on the board. All right, so there's a few different ways that you can do this activity. So depending on like where your kids are at and what you want the goal to be, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to hand out index cards like this. And then depending on what you want your kids to do based on like the activity options, you're either going to have them write down just a vocab word or a vocab word with the definition on the back. So there's 4 different ways you can kind of do this, and depending on what you want your kids to do, you can decide if you want them to write down a vocab word or a vocab word and a definition. So the first way is this one here. So these cards underneath have a definition, and then the vocab word is on the back. So after you've handed out index cards to all the kids, you'd have them write definition and vocab word, hand them back into you, and then you would develop categories based on what the kids have turned in. You can have them refer back to the textbook to make sure they're all on the same page. For this lesson, it's about volcanoes. So this first one is different types of volcanoes. So for this one, this is probably the hardest one. So you kind of rate the questions based on the difficulties. The easiest ones are going to be 100 points. Hardest ones are going to be 500. This is kind of like the classic Jeopardy! And so what you would do is have the kids then be in like pairs or small teams, and they would get to pick how hard of a question they want. So say you want to do 300, then you could read off the definition. So this one is a very steep cone-shaped hill or mountain. And if the kids think they know the question, then you can say that they can guess, and this one's a cinder cone. So if they guess right, they would get the points, and if not, someone else could try and guess. Another way to do this, it's a little bit easier, is so this one's names of volcanoes. And so you can have all the definitions exposed so that the kids can see what all the different definitions are, and all these would be worth the same points then, since they can see them up front. And the kids could be able to look at all of them and say they knew this one's the biggest eruption in the US that happened in 1980, and it was Mount St. Helena. So say they knew that one, but they didn't know the other ones, they could guess this one first. And it helps that, say students don't know, they don't want to randomly guess because they don't want to be embarrassed if they don't know it, they at least know up front if they have a pretty good idea based on the definition of what the word is. So this is another one where you'd want kids to write the definition and the vocab word on the back. Another way to do this activity is to have the kids just write the definition or just write the vocab words. So this is what comes out of volcanoes. And so what the kids could do is this is kind of the inverse of this one. So students can pick a word and then provide the definitions. So say ash is what comes out of a volcano. You could say it's like powdered rocks. So if the kids guess right, then they would get this card, and these would all be the same amount of points again. And then the last way to do this, and this is how it talks about it in Words Their Way, is kids just write down the vocab word, and then they would you'd like compile them, you say, okay, here, what are some parts of volcanoes? And kids can just raise their hand and guess. Say a kid guesses vent. You give them the points for vent. Then you could, if you wanted to, as a follow-up, ask them for the definition, or you could just have it be they're just trying to guess the vocab words that go with it. And one way to do that is to have kids kind of go back in the book and look for like Let's go through parts of volcanoes. What are some parts of volcanoes? Go through the text and identify them. So basically you go through these, whichever variety you've chosen, and the kids guess until they're all gone. They can work in pairs or small groups until all the words are guessed. And then you can keep points, you can not keep points. It's a great way for kids to learn vocab in different ways. And there's kind of different levels based on where your kids are at. All right, so for modification, there's a couple of different things you can do. So if we're looking at diverse learners, you can provide students with a matching set of all the answers. They can hold them up or they can just refer to them while they're thinking about like what it might be. So this would kind of work for any of the ones that are the definition-based ones, so these first two, or this one on the end. They could just have a list of words of all of the different words on the words, like all the types of volcanoes, names of volcanoes, what comes out of them, and parts on a list in front of them. So they can just hold it up, or at least they have a reference to go on. You can also review all the possible answers with the students before playing the game, just to give them like kind of a primer for all the definitions. And you can also pair up the student when generating vocab words if that's too difficult for them to independently come up with them. For English language learners, you can provide the answers in both. If it's a vocab word, you can provide the answers in both English and Spanish. You can also provide students again with a sheet that identifies the vocab words in English and the other needed language. You can also pair them up with an English speaking student to help them when they're doing the vocab words. And for gifted students, I think you could ask them to provide one additional fact about each card. So if it's, say, the Mount St. Helena one again, or Mount St. Helen, what's one other fact you know about Mount St. Helen? That would make it more challenging for our gifted students. The next activity is a compound words activity. So the purpose of this activity is to help students learn new compound words and to see all the possible words that can be created by the words they already know. So these high frequency, high utility words. So all you need for this is a compound word card. Again, just like an index card, you can handwrite these, and then notebooks paper. And there's a list of compound words that can be found in Appendix E of Words Their Way. So first you need to decide if you're going to do a shared word or a concept sort. So a shared word is where you do like all words that have like the word land in them. So you have a bunch of different words that have land. Concept would be something like, if you had a bunch of compound words related to volcanoes, you would do that as a concept short. So you're going to provide students with the compound words, ask them to cut them into their parts. Then while in pairs, students are going to team up to create as many real and nonsense words as they can. They can either write sentences or draw pictures. And you can have students call off the words they created until the entire list is gone. So, all right, so for this activity, students will be given a card like this where the word is all still together. And you'd ask the students to cut them out where the two words are. So this word is hometown. So they would cut it into home and town. And you might ask students also to cut off this kind of extra white space on the edge, just so they don't get confused and only use the first word for like the beginning of words during the activity. So once your words are cut out, you'll have a bunch of them like this. So my base words that I used are land, down, back, and home. So landfill, homeland, and wasteland, and then downtown, downstairs, down low, backyard, backbone, backpack, homemade, homework, and hometown is our last one. So what you would do then is after students have cut out all of these, they'd be working with a partner and you'd ask them to create as many new and fake words as they can. So you could probably do like half of these, you could do the whole thing if you wanted to take a little longer. But then basically you're just gonna have kids, they would have these cutouts and they can start reorganizing the words to make real or fake words. You could have them do both or just do real words. So they could do things like, I think like homework would work, or using home and town to create a new word. Other things like that, and they just keep working until they've basically like run out of time. So you could set a timer of maybe 5 to 10 minutes for them to work on this with their partner. And they would write down all the words they could think of on a whiteboard or a blank piece of paper. And so then once they're done, you would have the students in pairs call off one of the words they thought of. So you could do hometown, and then you would write the word, you write hometown on the board. You'd ask if anybody else had that. Students would raise their hands. If they had it, they would cross it off. And the students who called off could circle it, and that would be their first point. Then the next group would go, and you just keep going around the room, seeing all the words that kids wrote until everyone either has everything crossed off or circled on their list. So once that is done, you could ask kids if they want, you can have kids do like some additional activities. You could have them try to pick one or two of the words that they got points for and have them write a sentence about it. Even if it's a fake word, you could have them draw a picture if it's a fake word, if that makes more sense, to kind of expand their vocabulary on that. So they could try to guess like draw a picture of like what bone stairs would be. And so that can help expand it. You could also, as they call it off, have them try to use it in a sentence, just to expand their use of those words. All right, so then a modification for this one. For diverse learners, you could do where you provide students with a sheet that already has either the beginnings or the endings already filled in. So you could have a sheet that has, for example, like the word home already on like the left-hand side, so they only have to fill in the second half, and they can just use these cards to like kind of pull up, or if it's the beginning, so it makes it easier that they've already have it like half filled. And then you could also provide like for the word like home, have a picture of like the house on the card also, or like the word down, so the students have a better idea of like recognizing those individual words. For English language learners, you can provide students with examples of what words can be formed until they understand the concept. You can explain they don't need to be real words. This would work really well for English language learners. It's just the idea that they know these base words and they can combine them. It's not necessarily that they need to make other real words that are these long kind of scary words. You can pair them up with an English speaking student for this to help as well. And then for gifted students, like I said, you can ask the students to use the word in a sentence when possible. And even if it's not a real word, you could have them try to use it in a sentence, so maybe be a more creative way for them to try to do it. And that is it. Thank you.